I worked for a painting company while in college. And while we were working one day, I came upon a new phrase. We were figuring things out. I remember I was painting a soffit somewhere in Edmonds, where our school was. And my friend Matthew was painting next to me, and we were finishing up doing some touch up. And I said, "Hey, how does this look? Does this look about right?" And he said the fateful words, "Can't see it from my house." Right? Which isn't really what you want your painters to say. But there was a sense about it that is like, okay, that's going to be good enough for me because I can't see it from my house. Now, actually, it was good. But that thought has been persistent in my mind. Can't see it from my house. You know, there's lots of things going on in the world today, but if I turn off the internet, I shut off my social media, things are pretty good where I live. I can't really see it all from my house. Some of that's good. Shut off all the flood of anxiety producing stuff. And some of it's bad. You know, I don't care. I don't care about what's going on in the world. I'm just going to live my own little life. But we're going to go to Esther chapter 4, because here we have Queen Esther hidden from the concerns that are outside the palace while the city is thrown into confusion. We see that at the end of chapter 3 because of an edict that was sent out that all the Jews are going to be annihilated 11 months from now. And she's a Jewish person, but she lives in the palace. And you know what? She has her own problems. She's got her own problems. It was a tough time getting to this spot, being taken from your home, being prepared for one night with the king to please him sexually in order to win favor so that maybe you could be the queen. But guess what? 5 years later, in her marriage to King Xerxes, it's probably pretty apparent through the text that his passion for her has cooled. She hasn't even seen her husband for a month because other women have been getting his attention, his time, his bed. And so she is now insulated with her own problems in her own palace, struggling with just trying to figure out life as a young woman. And this happened. So we turn to Esther chapter 4. Hopefully you'll just join me. When Mordecai learned, this is her cousin, almost like an uncle to her, but officially a cousin, when he finds out that this edict has gone out and all the Jewish people were thrown into confusion, but the whole city was pretty messed up. What Mordecai did was he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth. That's like, gunny sacks or burlap, right? And ashes. And went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry, which is rather curious. What's going on with that? We don't see that as our normal mode, except for we've seen people in the streets marching, protesting, saying, "Do you understand what's happening to us?" And of course, we know those riots and have happened on top of those peaceful protests. I know pastors who have been in those peaceful protests, and then rioters come through and steal the message. But do you remember the heart of the message? Look at us. We're a struggling people. Our African Americans were struggling people, feeling invisible, feeling like they were overlooked. And look at what's going on. And so the George Floyd protests and all those different kinds of things that, again, got co-opted and turned into something that nobody really wanted, and certainly messed with the message. But that was the idea. Sackcloth and ashes. Oh, wailing in the streets. Do you understand? So we're very familiar with this, although we didn't think it's proper sometimes to do it that way. Here we go. Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, went in the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, but only to the entrance, because no one was allowed in the king's gate looking like that. You actually needed to dress up. The king himself, we know, was very focused on luxury and body image because of the way we see him develop his harem and the people around him. He was very, very insulated from the problems out there as well. And so we see this rule that nobody looking like that comes in here. You better dress up. And so in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree was reached, there was mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and lamenting. Those are important words. Fasting, weeping, and lamenting. And many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. And so what does she do? She sends garments out to Mordecai. Mordecai, put on some clothes and come into the gate, because he wouldn't be allowed in. She wants to talk to him, and she wants to have connection with him. What's going on? Tell me more about this. But he can't. He just will not accept the clothing. And so it says that she sent garments to him that he could take off his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So she calls to Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who has been attending her, and he goes out for her. And so then they have this little interchange through this man, Hathach, to Mordecai, and then back to Esther, and then back to Mordecai. So it's an intermediary situation. And so she sends him out to go find out what's going on, Mordecai. And so Hathach goes out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai tells him all that's going on, all that's happened, that how Haman said he's going to pay all this money in order to annihilate the Jews. And Mordecai gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. So he says, you got to go back in, bring the documents, tell her what's going on. She's insulated in this palace. She can't see it from her house, from her room. She doesn't even know what's going on. And so he's got this role, Hathach does, to go back and forth and command her to go beg with the king. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Now, verse 10, then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. Right? There was only 7 men who could see the face of the king. That's the quote. That could go in and out anytime they wanted to, because they had that favor with the king and they were his advisors, except for when he was sleeping with a woman. That was one of the rules. But any other time, they could come in and out and see his face. And so someone else would be put to death, except to the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I haven't been called to come into the king these 30 days. So she explains the problem. Like, this isn't really good. And you know what? If the king is trying to get rid of Esther right now, this would be the way to do it. If his passion is cooled, she knows what's been done to Vashti. She's just sent packing because she doesn't obey the word of the king. And this may be, after 3 months or 30 days rather of this cooling off of maybe the passion of the king. It's like, well, maybe he's going to just try to get rid of me. And you've maybe felt that in your job sometime where you're like, man, the boss hasn't spoken to me in this long, and all the writing on the wall seems to be that I'm out, and then someone says, hey, why don't you go check in and see if your boss really wants to keep you, and you're like, I don't know if I want to do that, right? The moment gets pretty tense because you don't want to hear what they have to say, and in this case, it would be death. So Esther is rightly concerned. So Mordecai, they told Mordecai what Esther had said. They passed that back. And then Mordecai told them, all right, tell her this. Don't think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Maybe she was tempted to think that. Think that maybe her palace was going to save her. And maybe she was on the edge of even doing any action because maybe she could be safe in her own little palace. Can't see it from my house. I'm insulated with my own concerns. He says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Meaning the Jewish people themselves aren't going to be destroyed. God's going to keep his promise. But as far as all the people myself, Mordecai is saying, and all the people in this city and the people in these provinces, we're all going to die, and God's going to have to raise up a new Jewish population, or just we're going to be completely ignored. And so he says, get after it right now. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you've not come to this kingdom for such a time as this. You're in charge of stuff. You're the queen. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. That's the citadel city there. And hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will fast as you do, and then I will go to the king, though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So she steps into her mode and says, okay, if I perish, I perish. That's it. And then she tells Mordecai to go do things. The power has shifted now. She's the one commanding Mordecai, all right, go do these things. Bring them this message that they need to fast and pray more mourning, sackcloth and ashes over this injustice that's to be done, and then I will go in and go after this problem with the king. There are a couple phrases that we want to focus on here. The first is, who knows? Because who knows why you are where you are at this time, why you have the friends that you have, why you're in the neighborhood that you're in this time that we're all in. And this phrase, who knows, is not an expression of skepticism, like, well, who knows why, or fatalism, well, like whatever's going to happen is going to happen. As Richard Bauckham suggests, it's a hopeful working hypothesis. That's a mouthful. And it's something used in life and death situations when the outcome is unclear. Who knows, this may be the moment that God is actually working in right this minute. And that's important for us to be thinking about. We've all wondered why we were alive at this time, right? For a really difficult year, surrounding a really difficult election, and all the intricacies and difficulties of this year that we've been experiencing. We all need a hopeful working hypothesis, right? Like, what is going on? What is going on now that you as a parent maybe are having to deal with your work and your home and your school work of your children? That's been a major pressure point. For those of you that are teachers, God bless you, trying to work these hybrid models and teach online while you possibly have your own kids at home managing all these different things. For those of you that are trying to figure out business and employment and working through all of the different regulations to keep us safe. Thank you for doing that. And oh my goodness, why now? Why were we alive at this time? What did you see in me, God, that you orchestrated that I would be born and live during these times, to do the work that I'm doing during these times? And so who knows is a great question for a hopeful working hypothesis. And then there are these two phrases that come after this: for such a time as this. And I want you to think about that. Do you have a voice? Do you have any influence? Are you holding keys? Can you open doors for other people for such a time as this? You may be in the position exactly where God wants you to be. That's the working hypothesis, right? That we're trying to figure out. Also, the next phrase is huge. If I perish, I perish. Esther says, it looks like this is my time. And you know what? If my life is forfeit, that's okay. And isn't that a powerful perspective? If I perish, I perish. You know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go overboard on this one, and I'm just going to step into this moment of what we would think of as destiny, this moment that God has called us to. It's a very powerful perspective. We learned last week from James chapter 4 that our life is just a mist. It's like a morning mist, and then it just disappears during the day. So what are you going to do with your life? I know a lot of people have asked Heather and I, they say, wow, you've really taken on a lot by being adoptive parents. You've brought in, man, I don't know if I could do that. I have this and I have this and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And for Heather and I, our perspective is, and, well, you have one life. What what else were we going to do with it? This you have one life. So for this time, at this moment, if it costs us everything, it costs us everything. But that's up to him, right? And so that thought process of just saying, okay, God, you know what you're going to do. You have at it. We will offer ourselves to you. That's Esther's perspective, and it needs to be your perspective too. The world right now has a lot of problems. If you click on a newspaper or get a newspaper delivered and you start reading through, or you double click on something and you go deeper in and figure out what's going on over there, search any country in the world and you will find problems that are way over your head. Just a little bit of deeper dive and you'll see more than you can handle in a fifth of a second. It used to be that you would get the news and then you could do something about it, because the news was the neighbor down the street had his barn on fire and you could run and help put it out. Now there's all sorts of fires going around the world that we can't really put out. You can't go there. And so we find ourselves leaning between anxiety and apathy. Anxiety being this I gotta help, I worry, I don't know how I'm gonna deal with this flood of information and the difficulty and all these things going on. Did you know what's going on in Zimbabwe or South Africa right now? Oh my goodness, did you know what's going on in Melbourne, Australia? Did you know what's going on? And you can really become anxious. The anxiety leads us to this Messiah complex that even Jesus didn't have. He didn't solve every problem when he was here. He didn't solve in every neighborhood. He didn't go around and heal everybody everywhere. He left some things. And when we're exposed to so many areas of concern, we tend to get overwhelmed. The alternate, right, of anxiety could be apathy, and where, well, I can't see it from my house, especially because I intentionally moved to this area to avoid those kinds of problems. Yeah, I don't see race riots in my neighborhood because you moved to the country, right? Or those kind of things. So you kind of have this apathy that is an option as well. Now, let's take the image of flooding and we'll try to process this a little bit. So think back to Hurricane Katrina 15 years ago, or Hurricane Zeta, and think of New Orleans right now. New Orleans, was flooded over and the levees broke and the flood broke through these very circles of concern, circles of these boundaries that people had, and flooded their entire area, and lives were lost and property was destroyed. But then remember the image of people in boats coming around to rescue people out of their second-story windows, off their roofs. And that's a beautiful impulse. We want to rescue people. And when we see these things happening, we want to respond in some way. We want to be on mission. We want to help out. But we all have different size boats, right? Some of you are paddling a single-person kayak and you want to load everybody on. You need to develop some capacity, right, in order to really load more people onto your boat. Others are coming by on barges, right, and think they can load those people on there. You need to make sure that you are engaging mission in the circles of concern that God is leading you into. And I really want to help you think about some modes of mission right now as we process this, because we do have circles of concern. We have our family, our neighbors, and our city that we live in. Those are very important areas. In fact, if you want to get work done on the pro-life level, if you want to get work done on the justice level, if you want to get work on in any of these areas with from unborn babies to homeless people that are struggling to whatever, if you want to go after justice, these are the areas really to work in. Not so much the national politics, because who knows, that doesn't always filter down, doesn't always work. But right now we have opportunity within these circles of concern: family, neighbors, and city. I want you to think about this. God so loved the world so you could love your neighbor. God so loved the world. He's got the big picture in mind so you can love your neighbor. We love God and we love our neighbor. If you take on the entire world's problems, it'll crush you. It crushed Jesus. I want to invite you to just two modes of mission right now in your circles of concern. And I also want to expand your sense of family in that first circle. So when we talk about mission, we're talking about this outward going thought process where we say yes to God. I will follow you and go wherever you want me to go. And we start taking those steps into the world around us that he's given to us, loving our neighbor. And when you think about missions, like a mission trip or a missionary, really, isn't that just relocating your neighborhood? It's just switching your neighborhood, saying, I'm going to actually go there. Some of you may need to do that. You may need to pick up and go to an area where you can actually address the concerns with your neighbors. That's important. That's the history of my family. My grandparents, Denny and Jean Grindle, came across new neighbors outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And so they dedicated a ton of time, 6 months out of every year, to go work with the Maasai and just become friends and neighbors with them, and bring assistance to them in a very difficult time, and bring the gospel to them as well, just as friends and neighbors, because you have to sometimes relocate your neighborhood. So that's what I'm talking about in mission, is you go after. But these are the two modes of mission that I want to encourage you in. One is advocacy, to speak on behalf of other people, because you hold keys, you have a voice, and you know people. You have keys, you have a voice, and you know people. And you can speak for those that are stuck, those that are lost. There's been a lot of conversation about systemic this and systemic that, but here's one system that works really well. It's your peer referral network. It's your circle of peers, those that you connect with. And when it's about time to hire somebody, you look to the people you trust, and you look to your circle of peers in that circle of concern, and you say, oh, look at who I know. And so, and as we all say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's a system. That's a system. Well, guess what? If your system is closed and you don't have friends that are African American, or friends from immigrant communities or other ethnicities, if you don't have friends like that, well, then guess what? That's just a system that just maintains itself. You know who you know, and you hire those you know because you trust them, right? And so, but you have the keys, you have a voice, and you know people. Advocacy is saying, I'm gonna open up my circle to allow other people in and give them access, open doors for them, right? So that's one area that is really easy to do, but it's going to take us being on mission. So advocacy is a point of mission. The second mode of mission is intercession. You hold the keys. Anything you unlock in heaven, wow. You have a voice. God, save this people. God, do this work. God, help out. God, send me. And you know people. Actually, you know the one. You know Jesus. You know the one who can actually make all these things happen. You are a gatekeeper for people, though. And what we need to move from, and this is a very big concern for me, is casual prayer. I mean, think about Mordecai running through the streets, right? Casual prayer, casual repentance. Oh, I guess I should talk to Jesus about that. No, if you look at Joel chapter 2, 12 through 17, God is talking to his people about fasting and about prayer. He says, turn to me with all your heart. With the same phrase that is used in Esther, with fasting, weeping, and mourning. And he says, rend your hearts, not your garments. He says, I want this to go deep, deep, deep. Return to the Lord your God. You may need to hear this today. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster. So who are you standing in the gap for? Who are you putting on a display for, like Mordecai, where he went out to garner public support for this cause? Who are you speaking up for? Who are you standing in the gap for. So Mordecai's moving into this mission saying, okay, I want God to move, but I'm going to move my body too. I want God to relent from disaster, and I'm going to put myself in the spot. Esther saying, if I perish, I perish. If my reputation goes down, well, then so be it. Because I have advocacy and I have intercession as two modes of mission. And remember, I wanted to extend your circle of family as well. Because first and foremost, we are the family of God. We talk about that a lot around here. The church, the holy ones, God's actual family, his human family that he wants. And there's a lot going on. And I want you to take these two modes of mission, advocacy and intercession, into the Central African Republic right now.
My name is Jeanette. I am a Christian and I love Jesus with all my heart. I love my children and I love the people of my country, the Central African Republic. There are both Christians and Muslims in my country, and we lived as neighbors as I worked to reach them for Christ. But my hope for a peaceful life didn't last. Our village was ambushed by the Islamist attackers. Guns started firing and we started running as fast as we could into the bush. All the Christians in my village were killed or driven into hiding. I fled with my children. We didn't even have time to put on our shoes or clothes.
Attacks like these have been targeting Christians in the Central African Republic for 8 years and continue today. Churches and missionary stations that have been built over decades have been destroyed, along with Christians' homes that have been burnt to the ground. In one area, the only structures that remained were the metal roofs of 2 churches. Thousands of Christians have spent years in makeshift temporary shelters, far from their homes, as the violence and instability continues. Delivering desperately needed help to displaced Christians often means overcoming impassable roads, using cargo planes, trucks, motorcycles, bicycles, and even canoes. With God's help, supplies are making it to Christians scattered throughout various camps. Today, Jeanette and more than 30,000 Christians in the Central African Republic have been driven from their homes, all because of their faithfulness in maintaining a witness for Christ in majority Muslim areas, in the face of severe Islamist violence. These courageous believers, our Christian brothers and sisters in the Central African Republic, have shown God's love and forgiveness to their persecutors. They continue to faithfully follow the Lord and trust Him to meet their needs.
And there's a lot there to think about. But one of the things we can do is in advocacy and intercession is to pray. Use our advantage, use our position, use our voice, because we have the keys. And I want to leave you with this. Jesus left the palace. He didn't stay. Although he was one with God, he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He didn't consider the advantage something to be held on to, but he used it to bring us to himself. And that's where we find ourselves today, in Jesus, because of his advocacy, because of his continued intercession on our behalf. And may we be those people who mourn injustice and use our advocacy and our intercession for the family of God to see his purposes take place in this world. Because who knows? Maybe you're in this position you're in for such a time as this.